Ethan's garage sat on the edge of a small Texas town where the hum of engines and the smell of oil seemed to define his life. At 30 years old, he had already resigned himself to a life of quiet routine, fixing cars, welding old frames, and earning just enough to keep the lights on. The world of wealth and luxury felt like another planet. He never imagined that world would one day roll right up to his garage, pulling him into something far bigger than he had ever dreamed. It was a hot summer afternoon when the limousine appeared, sleek and black against the dusty road. Ethan paused mid-repair, wiping the sweat from his forehead as the car door opened. Out stepped Victoria Hayes, a woman in her late 40s whose presence radiated confidence, yet whose eyes carried a kind of desperate urgency. Beside her sat her daughter, Sophia, just 18, in a wheelchair. The sight startled Ethan. He wasn't used to clients like these walking into his life, let alone billionaires and their families. Victoria explained quickly, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. Doctors across the country had tried everything for Sophia after the accident that left her paralyzed, but nothing worked. Someone had told her about Ethan, about the mechanical suit he once built for his late brother to help him walk again, a project born out of love and grief. She had come not as a billionaire demanding a service, but as a mother pleading for hope. Ethan froze at her words, his hands instinctively tightening around the rag he held. That suit was never meant to be more than a private attempt at healing a wound that had scarred him deeply. He wasn't a doctor or a scientist, just a mechanic who tinkered with machines. The thought of trying again, of risking another heartbreak, had terrified him. He shook his head at first, insisting he couldn't promise miracles. But then he looked at Sophia. Sophia's eyes weren't filled with entitlement or arrogance, but with a quiet longing he couldn't ignore. She smiled softly, trying to ease the tension. "Maybe you don't have to fix me," she said gently. Give me a chance to feel what it's like again." Those words cut through Ethan's hesitation. He wasn't facing a billionaire's demand. He was facing a young woman's hope. And in that moment, he felt something stir inside him, a purpose that hadn't burned so strongly in years. After a long silence, Ethan nodded, though uncertainty weighed on him. He agreed to try, making it clear that he couldn't guarantee results. Victoria's eyes filled with relief, gratitude flooding her usually composed face. Sophia simply smiled wider, her expression more radiant than any words could capture. Ethan led them into his garage, suddenly aware of how modest and cluttered it looked compared to the wealth they must have been used to. Yet neither mother nor daughter cared about the grease-stained walls or tools scattered across the floor. That night, long after the limousine disappeared down the road, Ethan sat alone at his workbench, staring at the half-forgotten parts of the exoskeleton suit. Memories of his brother flooded back, the laughter, the determination, and the heartbreak when the disease eventually claimed him. For years, Ethan had locked away that pain, refusing to revisit the project. But Sophia's eyes haunted him, her words echoing like a call he couldn't ignore. He sighed heavily, picked up his tools, and began sketching out improvements. In the days that followed, Ethan worked with a focus he hadn't felt in years. Victoria returned with Sophia often, sometimes bringing food, sometimes simply watching, quietly as he tested designs. Sophia, however, was different. She refused to just sit in silence. She teased him about being too serious, joked about the grease on his hands, and filled the garage with laughter. "You know," she said one afternoon, "maybe I'll marry a mechanic one day. They work harder than anyone I know." Ethan nearly dropped his wrench, blushing at the comment, while Sophia laughed until her eyes sparkled. What began as cautious visits soon became something deeper. Sophia's presence shifted the atmosphere of the garage, turning it from a place of loneliness into one of life and energy. She would tell him stories about her world, lavish parties, private schools, and constant expectations, while marveling at how peaceful his simple life seemed. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, sharing memories of his brother and dreams he never dared to chase. Slowly, an unlikely friendship began to form, resting on honesty and mutual respect. Ethan knew he was racing against time. Each night, long after Sophia and Victoria left, he stayed in the garage, welding, coding, and testing. His hands ached, his eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he pressed on. For him, this wasn't just about building a machine, it was about giving Sophia a chance to reclaim something she thought was lost forever. Deep down, though, he wondered if he was also building something for himself, a chance to heal, to prove that even an ordinary mechanic could create something extraordinary. And so, the first chapter of their story unfolded not in a hospital or laboratory, but in a dusty Texas garage where a billionaire's daughter and a humble mechanic met halfway between two worlds. It wasn't about money or status, but about hope, determination, and the quiet bond that was beginning to form between them. Neither of them knew what the future held, but both felt the stirrings of something life-changing, something neither expected to find in that unlikely place. The night before Sophia's first test with the suit, Ethan barely slept. He went over every bolt, every wire, every small adjustment, afraid of failure. Memories of his brother's struggle weighed heavily, but so did the trust in Sophia's eyes. By morning, exhaustion clung to him, yet determination drove him forward. When Victoria's limousine arrived, his heart pounded. Sophia rolled into the garage with her usual bright smile, though he could sense the nervousness she tried to hide. Victoria, on the other hand, carried a look of silent prayer, her hands clenched tightly together. Ethan helped Sophia into the exoskeleton, carefully strapping her in, explaining each part so she wouldn't feel afraid. The machine whirred softly. As it powered up, a sound that made Victoria gasp quietly. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hum of the motors. Ethan crouched beside Sophia, his voice calm but filled with urgency. Don't think about the steps. Just trust the machine and trust yourself. Sophia nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the support bars. The moment had arrived, heavier than any of them expected. The suit's motors guided, her legs forward, slow and deliberate. Her first step was shaky, her knees trembling under the weight of her body. For a second, Ethan thought it might collapse, but then Sophia steadied, determination flashing in her eyes. She took another step, then another. Victoria covered her mouth, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Sophia looked up at Ethan, her own eyes brimming with tears, and whispered, "I'm walking." The words, fragile yet powerful, filled the garage with an energy none of them would ever forget. Each passing day, Sophia grew stronger. What began as tentative, halting movements soon became confident strides across the garage floor. Ethan adjusted the suit constantly, improving balance, refining movement, ensuring her safety. With every step, Sophia's laughter filled the room, as if she were reclaiming pieces of herself she thought were gone forever. Victoria often stood back, watching silently, her heart swelling with gratitude. For her, this wasn't just progress. It was a miracle unfolding, and she owed it to the humble mechanic who refused to give up. Word of Sophia's progress spread quickly. Friends of the Hayes family, doctors, even reporters began to take notice. Calls flooded in, asking about the machine, about Ethan's design, about whether it could help others. Engineers offered to buy it, companies offered enormous sums of money, but Ethan refused every offer. "This isn't about profit," he said firmly to Victoria one evening. "This is about giving kids like Sophia their lives back." His voice carried a conviction that silenced even the wealthiest and most persistent buyers. His creation would not be locked away by money. Victoria was deeply moved by Ethan's refusal to profit from Sophia's miracle. She approached him one evening as Sophia practiced walking across the garage. "I want to fund your work," she said, her voice soft yet resolute. Ethan started to protest, but she raised her hand. "On one condition, you stay in charge of how this technology is used. I'll give you every resource you need, but the vision remains yours." Ethan stared at her, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of turning his brother's dream into something far greater than either of them imagined. Together, they launched a foundation dedicated to providing mobility suits to children across the country, completely free of charge. Sophia became the heart of the mission, her story inspiring millions. At events, she would walk on stage in the exoskeleton, her smile radiant, her voice steady as she spoke about hope, determination, and the mechanic who believed in her. Audiences wept openly, touched not by wealth or status, but by the raw truth of a young woman reclaiming her life and a humble man's compassion that made it possible. Despite the sudden fame, Ethan never changed. Each morning he returned to his garage, fixing cars with the same quiet dedication he always had. He refused interviews, declined invitations to glamorous events, preferring the simple rhythm of his work. Yet every spark from his welder, every turn of his wrench carried a new meaning now. He knew he was no longer just repairing machines, he was repairing lives.